Hello everybody, welcome to the webinar If Your Job is to Get a Job. My name is Tom Bianchi, I'm the VP of Marketing here at Acquia, and I'll be your host and moderator for today. Before I say any more about anything, I wanted to give you a little bit of background as to why this webinar and why today and why now. There's a collection of people that have been involved in getting this project live, and I'm going to introduce those to you in just a few moments. But today the purpose is really straightforward and really simple. We wanted to just give back to the community. At least a little bit. We've all seen people affected by the pandemic and by the downturn that's been caused off of the back of that as well, with people losing jobs. And so we wanted to try and do something, if it's just a little thing, that's more than nothing, just to give back to everybody and make sure that we can help those who need to get back on their feet and hopefully find a new job. So without further ado, let me introduce you to our panelists for today. These people have come from various different organizations, not just from Acquia. I'm so pleased to have the involvement of colleagues from Cutover and Azari Partners too. We've got Julia Burkitt from Acquia, Alex Jewell from Cutover, Corinne Nickel from Azari Partners, as well as Jules Redfarm. And just to make sure that everyone knows who's who, because we have got two Julias on the phone today, I will be referring to Julia Burkitt as Julia and Jules Redfarm as, guess what, Jules. So in case anyone gets confused, just listen for that difference. Okay, so today's agenda is pretty action-packed, and we've tried to cram a lot in here. The agenda that you'll see on the screen follows the essential journey that you're going to take through a recruitment process, hopefully in chronological order, although sometimes these things don't quite happen as they're supposed to. So first up, we've got CV tips with Corinne. Then Julia and Alex have kind of partnered up to take us through application process do's and don'ts, one of my favorite sections. Yes, that's right, I've got favorites.
Thanks.
Then Jules is going to take us through the 7 steps to take for a great interview, which has got the best meme of the day in. There you go, Jules. I know you don't like to be left out.
Thank you, Tom.
And I'll be asking each one of our team members a question or two as we go. But I wanted to point out that there is a Q&A box in the Zoom webinar that you should see as you've logged in. So now, if you've got a question at any point during the webinar, then feel free to go to that Q&A box and type your question in there. I've got a little window open here with all of the questions in, and we'll try and get to as many of those as we can. What I'm going to do is, if your question is really time relevant and associated with the content that you've just seen, I'll ask it there and then. But we do have a discussion section at the end. So I'll try and make sure that in that section we get through all of them. Okay. All right, so onwards to our first section. Which I'm so pleased to introduce to you, is CV Tips by the very wonderful Corinne Nickel. So Corinne, over to you.
Thank you, Tom, and welcome everyone. Well, first of all, the main goal of your CV is to land you an interview. And there's 2 important things your CV should contain to help you get that interview. Number 1 is meaningful insight on what you can do for the business you're applying to and evidence to support that. The second thing is you should include something unique about you that will help you stand out from often hundreds of other CVs the reader is reviewing. It should be something that will encourage the reader to want to learn more about you. I'm going to go into more detail about both of these tips in a few minutes, but first let's cover a few common mistakes we see on CVs. The first one is a lack of clear objective. Consider that recruiters and hiring managers are often reviewing large quantities of CVs, and if they aren't sure what your specific goal is, i.e. what role you're going for, you may be passed over. The second mistake we see is a lack of context about the company you're working for now or your previous companies. What we're trying to do is match up not only your skills and experience, but the types of backgrounds and work environments and businesses you've been involved in. So don't just list the name of the company, unless it's a big brand name that everyone knows. Give us a statement or two about what the company does. The third mistake is lack of business impact demonstrated on the CV. When I mentioned meaningful insight about what you can do for the business, you need to show that you have actually contributed some results, some accomplishments, and some real positive impact to the business. The fourth mistake people do make is they make their CV too brief and too short. And that's probably because you've been told it should just be one page. But actually, for most people that have a few years of experience or more, about 2 pages is usually about right. The last mistake is that the CV doesn't actually match the person's LinkedIn profile. What most recruiters and hiring managers do is they get a CV that they're interested in, they go straight to the LinkedIn profile to find out more about the person. And sometimes there can be some inconsistencies, and it may just be that you haven't updated your LinkedIn profile. So you want to make sure that those match. Now I'm going to talk about 3 sections on your CV that can actually help you accomplish that goal of getting an interview. The first section we call career highlights, and you don't have to call it that, but that's what we use. And this is how you show that you've made a difference, you've contributed to the business. It should be a list of contributions, compelling things, results, metrics that will engage the reader's attention. An example, and if you can go to the next slide, Tom. Next slide, there we go. So planned and executed 3 European summits, 2016 to 19, which increased delegate numbers by 3 times, partner revenues by 4 times, and reduced churn to less than 10%. So here, the person who wrote this, and this is a real example, explained what she did, showed the results. This is evidence of how you contribute to the business. On your career highlights section, you can also list some special awards, President's Club, or recognition, but we recommend keeping it pretty focused on the business. The next section I'm going to talk about is what we call personal style and characteristics. And this is how others see you as a colleague, as a manager, as a leader. It doesn't need to be too long, and you don't want to oversell, but just gives the reader a sense of what it's like to work with you. And a tip I have here is you can actually go to your LinkedIn profile where you may have some recommendations from colleagues, and you already have some good content there that you could use for this section, just to explain a little bit about what it's like to work with you. The last tip, and this is where you can really connect with the reader, is what we call your interests and activities section. I think we need to go to the next slide, please. So this is a real example from one of our candidates. He called this section dedication other than work, which I really liked. And if you read through this, you can show that he's showing some humor, some humility. He's not taking himself too serious, but he's giving me, the reader, a real sense of what he likes to do outside of work. And this is really interesting because let's say I was on the fence about whether I wanted to take this candidate forward to the next step, which would be probably a phone interview. And I wasn't sure about, I get to this section and I want to talk to the guy. It's really fun. I've got 3 things in common with him and I want to have a chat. So now the ball is in the candidate's court to be able to sell me further. And so this is the goal. You want to really try to get in there with your kind of telling them about yourself outside of work. Okay, back to you, Tom.
Great, thanks for that. So we're going to do a little bit of Q&A. And so the first question up is, I've had a couple of short stints, less than a year in a company. Should I explain that in my CV?
Absolutely. I think you don't want to leave any question marks in the reader's mind. So good to be transparent. Maybe you took some time off to travel. Maybe you had to take some time off to care for a relative. You should put a brief explanation on your CV about those gaps.
Great. And then one more question here from the audience as well, which is one of the things that is I think more common than people would even imagine, but the nuances of US versus UK English, British English. So the question is here from Andreas: US companies want to get a resume, UK companies want to get a CV. What should I submit if I don't know how or who should be receiving my application?
Okay, well, a resume and CV is essentially the same thing. We do see in some of the European cultures that it's more common to actually have a photograph, for example, on your CV. That's less common in the US. We don't see people using the resume that way so much. That's why the LinkedIn profile can be important. But it's really be yourself, be authentic, maybe do a little research on the differences, but The main thing is tell your story, don't make it too brief, and again, just really put yourself forward and be unique.
Great. Okay, we've got a few more questions here, which are all CV specific, so I'm going to go through them. We've got one here. How similar would you make the CV in LinkedIn? Direct copy, or would you use the two channels differently?
Jules, do you have any comments on that?
Hi, team. Well, I would say LinkedIn can be a sensitive thing sometimes because you're not able, perhaps, due to company restriction, to really use some data that you would in the CV. So I would say LinkedIn, show off yourself as best as you can and with all information that's available to you, but make the CV a lot more tailored and a lot more data and achievement driven. So similar, but that's the difference, I would say.
Agreed.
Great. All right, we have got a few more questions. I'm going to take one more question now, and then I'm going to save a couple of others for the discussion later on as well. So this one's about format. What are your views regarding PowerPoint versus Word for CVs? And I mean, maybe I would extend that and throw in PDF as well.
Yes, and I think Alex and Julia may touch on this as well. So we recommend PDF as the best format, mainly because of how the data goes into the company's applicant tracking system. So, you know, the actual design of the CV isn't as important, although it should be, you know, really pretty easy to read and not too jumbly, but definitely use PDF.
Yeah, I just want to follow up on that, if you don't mind, Tom. Hi everyone, Alex here. I completely agree with Karen there. I think the only way that you can absolutely 100% guarantee that the person receiving your resume or the document that you send them sees it in the same format as you're seeing it is by converting it to PDF. You know, even some simple things like, does someone use the Microsoft Office suite? Are they on a Mac? Are they on a PC? Can have a multitude of factors that will affect and impact how your Word document looks if it's not in PDF format. So absolutely would recommend PDF.
Julia, anything else from your side, or?
No, I mean, I've seen them submitted in Word, and our ATS system can't actually read it. So that then creates a difficulty in terms of a smooth transition into application. So PDF all the way.
PDF. Great, thanks guys. Okay, so then hopefully that's a great tee up for our next section. And we're gonna, I should have advanced the slide faster, but there we go. We're gonna talk about job application tips now, and we've got Alex and Julia, not Jules, on the top of this one. So guys, over to you.
Cheers, Tom. Appreciate it. Yeah, Julia and I thought we'd spend a few minutes talking about how to focus on making an impact when you're talking to internal recruiters, when you're applying for jobs directly at companies.
Absolutely. So Alex and I run busy recruiting departments, and there are definitely some things that you can do to make yourself really stand out and to make the internal recruiters' lives easier.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think just generally speaking, it's a great plan to focus on building a relationship with your recruiter, as they're ultimately going to function as your internal champion at the company and can really, really help you to make a success of the hiring process.
Absolutely. So one of the most important factors that you need to remember when you're interviewing over Zoom like this, or anything else such as Teams or GoToWebinar, anything, is that the hiring manager or the recruiter just sees your top half. It sounds really obvious, but I've been in dozens of interviews in the past few weeks where people have not really thought about it. My advice is please do wear a shirt and tie or a top or blouse, a dress that you're comfortable in, and that you should dress and be professional. You need to present yourself on Zoom how you would really present yourself if you were going into an office to interview. So take the time to look neat. Don't let the hiring manager's overriding thought about you be about the bedhead hair or the crazy t-shirt logo that you've got on. You know, make sure that what they're concentrating on is what you're telling them and what you have to say. Psychologically, it's really difficult for people on Zoom to think about you and get the whole impression of you. So you really have to make the impressions that you can count, so make them positive. The other thing is also to remember to take notes at appropriate times. That's always quite difficult when you're on Zoom. So I would explain, first of all, I'm going to be taking some notes if that's okay. It shows that you're interested enough in what they're saying to take notes. Also, actually, it's a good way of summing up at the end. Some hiring managers that I've worked with previously have actually refused to hire people who have not taken notes because they felt that they haven't been engaged in the process. So you really need to take down those notes and remember to reference back to them when you can.
Thanks, Julie. I should probably take some notes to get some more hair product to deal with this bedhead of mine that is growing out of control during lockdowns. Apologies. Not taking our own advice on board here. Look, I want to talk to you guys about a couple of things, about making connections and showing interest when we are in a world of fully remote work currently, and volumes of applications tend to be super, super high at the moment in companies. So that's the bones of what I'm going to talk to you all about for the next couple of minutes. But first of all, going back to what I mentioned in the intro section to this piece, is looking at leveraging your internal recruiting partners and focusing on building that relationship first and foremost. They're your advocate during this internal process and also have a seat at the decision-making table, albeit most of the time your recruiter will not have the casting vote of whether you get hired or not. They still have a lot of influence. And it's often forgotten, but internal recruiters at companies are trying to hire for their future colleagues that they're going to be working with day in, day out, and will be, you know, the goer of whether or not that business succeeds. And so it stands to reason that they're pretty invested in the decision itself and will try and pull whatever levers that they can internally to influence the hiring decision if they feel strongly about a candidate. I think one thing that's often forgotten, and something that I would definitely recommend you doing before we go into the more formalized do's and don'ts in our mind, is to ask for guidance from your recruiter. It sounds so silly and so obvious, but so many people forget to use the knowledge base of that internal resource when talking to a recruiter. Guess what? This recruiter works closely in collaboration with the hiring manager and with the interviewing team, so they will have a ton of insight to share with you, and the vast majority will be more than willing to share a load of really interesting tidbits with you about how to approach interviews, you know, the likes, the dislikes of certain interviewers, what to prepare, some extra feedback. So please don't forget, don't be shy, ask for some advice from your interviewer. And, you know, looking at building rapport. It's very difficult at the best of times, but when application numbers are super high and volume is massive, as we're seeing right now, you know, it doesn't mean that you still can't have that great first impression. And we talked about CVs with Karen earlier, massively important, all that advice. And I know Jules is going to talk a little bit more later on about the interviewing process. But a couple of things that come to mind. One's an old cliche that I was taught earlier in my career of the 3 Ps of personalization, personality, and preparation. It's a big cliche, I know, but it all stands to reason. It's very important to remember these 3 Ps. So first of all, as Karen said, adding personality to your CV, your resume, your covering letter, your LinkedIn process can be the absolute make or break of that first impression. Add some life, some fun to it. Massively important to do that. You know, personalization is equally important. It doesn't take too much time and effort to go and find out who you should be addressing, the name of a hiring manager, the name of a company, the name of a recruiter. Make sure to tailor your covering letter or your CV to the person who you intend to read it. Hugely important. And also, final points on social media platforms, really important that you either do some spring cleaning of all of your social platforms before applying, or if you don't want to do that, then just put them to private, because social media platforms are easy to pop up in relation to the email address that you use for an application. So if you don't want recruiting team members or otherwise, looking at your Twitter accounts or otherwise, then just make them private. Super easy to do in your settings. Final point for this little section is looking at preparation. Yeah, prepare for a pretty novel interviewing experience that you likely will not have seen before. And I mentioned, given the numbers of applications, we'll see a lot of third-party software and technology platforms used by larger companies, especially to help to process the number of candidates who are coming inbound. These could include video interviewing platforms such as HireVue, which is asynchronous interviewing, or perhaps if you're an engineer or otherwise, online tests, whether it be psychometric, coding tests, platforms such as HackerRank, Codility. There are numerous examples. Do some research. Alleviate that anxiety and the potential for surprise. Makes a huge difference, and as I said, will really help to reduce your anxiety levels before whatever step comes next.
Thanks, Alex. That's great. So let me just sum up, and I'm going to do some please do's. So the things that you really should think about, and sum up on some of the things that Alex and Karen have already talked about. So do provide appropriate social profile links. Make sure that they are appropriate, and make sure that you give your links, your LinkedIn profile, and anything else that you might have authored, so a blog or anything else that you contribute to. Do personalise your covering letter if one is required. The days of Dear Sir just don't cut it anymore. Do your research on the job, the company and the hiring manager, and remember to connect with those people. Do add context to your CV, as Karen talked about. You know, it's not just what you were responsible for, but actually why it changed the game in the companies that you've previously been employed with. And the last one is do initiate personal contact with the relevant internal stakeholders. So that could be the a recruiter, it could be a peer of the hiring manager who might be known to you, maybe second or third connection. Connect with them and ask for their viewpoint. Some of the most impressive candidates that I've sourced and have gone through the process have basically, you know, I've had other people come to me and say, yeah, they've connected with me and asked what's going to happen. So Alex, did you want to cover some don'ts?
Yeah, some don'ts, the stuff not to do. I mean, we already mentioned sending a resume in any other format but PDF. So I'll reiterate that here, my PDF tattoo that I clearly have on me. Another thing to mention in terms of don't make multiple applications to roles in the same company unless they are specifically roles that you think you're a great fit for. We see a lot of spraying and praying across applicant tracking systems of people applying for every role under the sun. Just remember, internal recruiting team members can see how many applications that you've made across different roles. And if you're applying for a software engineering role, a sales role, the CEO's role, it kind of lessens your level of credibility somewhat. So bear in mind not to do that. Don't forget either, as a next point, to include your key contact details on your CV. Yeah, your mobile number and your address. Very important. If a phone interviewer is running late for their session with you, doesn't have a login to the applicant tracking system, but does have your CV, make it easy for them to see the number that they should be calling. Simple tip, but goes a long way. And another point to mention goes back to our high school days of reading every exam question properly. If you get a long list of application questions or a rigorous application process, just read every single question correctly. The amount of times we see just random stuff noted because people have assumed that they should be answering a question or a point in one way or another is mad. Read it and respond effectively. The final point, I think it's important to note, don't forget to follow up after your application. There's a lot of applications, as we've talked about numerous times. So another way to make yourself stand out is by not being shy and by following up. Reaching out to that individual person that you've highlighted on LinkedIn, that could be the hiring manager or could be the recruiter, you know, say, hey, I applied a couple of weeks ago via your applicant tracking system. I think I'd be a really great candidate for this job. I'm looking forward to talking to you. Here's some available times, and here's a little bit more about me that will add a little bit of personality to go back to one of those 3 Ps. Even if you get rejected for a role, and this is an important point, it's important to keep that level of professionality up. Follow up to a rejection email. Really important that you do that, but be polite, be super professional, say thank you for reviewing my profile, I wish you all the best. Don't fall into the trap that hilariously I've seen numerous people over the years responding to a do not reply at email address from an applicant tracking system with all sorts of crazy stuff. We can see that on the inside, and the amount of random abuse that I've got from random people that have not passed the resume review stage is enlightening, to say the least. So don't fall into that trap. Keep that level of professionalism high as best you can. All right, Tom. So that's the follow-up tips.
Fantastic. Thanks for that, guys. So we have had a couple more questions here. And I'm just opening up the Q&A panel. There we go. And one of those is from Kyla. I hope I pronounced your name correctly. You mentioned seeking advice from the internal hiring manager. Do you recommend asking different questions based on if it's HR hiring manager, e.g. benefits and company culture, versus a division hiring manager, e.g. expected R&R? I'm not sure quite what that means, but does that make any sense?
Great question. I think I get the essence of it. Yeah, you should direct your questions to different specialists and ask different ones. And what I was meaning in the bit that I was talking about a few minutes ago was asking for advice from that HR interviewer ahead of you going on and talking to the hiring manager for the job that you're going for. So for example, if you're applying for a sales role and you know that the second step of an interviewing process is going to be with the head of sales, that first step of the process is likely to be with a recruiter, someone on my team or Julia's team, for example. That's the person that you should be asking questions to, not only about company culture, benefits, and all that good stuff that you mentioned, but about how you should go about approaching that second stage interviewer with the person that will be your line manager if you were to get the job. So that's the advice there.
Yeah, great. And then, so I've probably experienced this myself, and I'm going to say nothing short of go and search for Tom Bianchi on Google, and then I'm not the photographer is all I'll say. Don't do this on a work laptop either. But I guess you guys talked about, you know, social profiles and stuff like that. Should people be aware of how their name comes up in a Google search too?
Yeah, absolutely.
To Julia, maybe?
If you haven't Googled yourself, it's really enlightening to do so and find out what comes up. All sorts of things can come up. And ideally, hopefully, if you've been writing some blogs or you've been a little bit out there, then that's going to be the top hit. But Google works on algorithms, so it will just pick up the most popular person. So, Tom, you need to start taking more photographs.
I'm honestly, I'm not going to explain who the person with the same name as me, what he does for a profession, but I'll just put it this way, it is not suitable for a work laptop. So,
okay, fine.
I'm going to leave that there. Funny story at my own expense. Okay, great. There are more questions coming in and loads of great questions, but we've got that discussion section at the end. So I'm going to keep moving. We've got really, really useful section now. And Jules, you're up next. There you are. Hello. And again, a little bit of a personal plug. Now, I've worked with Jules before, and if there is anybody to coach you through an interview, Jules is the one to do so. And that is what we're going to learn about now. 7 steps to a great interview. Jules.
Thank you, Tom. So you have your perfect CV, you've applied, and what happens next? The 7 steps to a perfect interview. And it's simply there to help you through the process. And I usually say, to me, interviewing is like dating, okay? So both sides just have a series of meetings or dates to try and understand if they actually a fit. And let's dive into it. First, research. So research is simply there to, number 1, make you feel comfortable in your subject, and number 2, to ask better questions. And you have the basic things like Google, Twitter, LinkedIn, and company website. Or you can sometimes go more in depth with TechCrunch, Aula, and Crystal Knows. And I know I don't have time to cover more in depth about those platforms, but I'm happy to do it afterwards. So you've done your research. Next step. Connect on LinkedIn. What does that do? Kick off the relationship, okay? And I usually say, make it personalized. So don't just send an invite, but say, look forward to meeting you, you know, would be great to connect, and I'll be sending you an agenda, which leads us to an agenda slide, hopefully, Tom. And the agenda is, I've had some discussions in the past, should I have an agenda or not? Okay, and is it too formal? Like, what's the point? Even that. And I always say, if you're in the sales role or any sales related function, always have an agenda, because the hiring manager will be actually looking at how you do that, because that's the sales interaction you'd have as a customer. If you don't have a sales role application, it's still important to have the professionalism fact of it. So it can be super simple, just to get them talking, you know, ask them what they're looking to get out of the meeting, anything you need to prepare. And then also, when you are in the meeting and qualifying them, make sure you start with them, okay? You'll be surprised a couple of times people don't even ask the hiring manager what they're looking for, right? How do you even know? How do you know if you're a fit if you don't ask them what are their hiring criteria? So it's good to say, just would like to understand what your top 3 or 5 things that you look for from this role, okay? So get them talking, so by the time you get to your part, hopefully you would have, you know, known enough to actually fit yourself better to the role. Okay, so back to the next stage and back to the dating analogy. So whilst it's important to sell yourself, you know, bring the data, the stories, make sure you kind of show off your skills, don't forget it's a two-way discussion, all right? So ask the questions that matter to you as well. So when you're talking to them, you need to understand if you're a fit also. So don't forget, two-way discussion, and make sure you have enough time to cover what matters to you as well. And then the famous one, always be closing, or as Yoda would say, be closing always. So what I mean by that, I know sometimes time can run away from you, but make sure you do a simple close. If you're not in sales, just open-ended, how did I do? Or if you're in sales, you cannot go hard enough, frankly, all right? Because the hiring VP will be looking at your behavior. So, you know, you can say, is there anything that would stop you putting me forward to the next stage? I mean, what are the next steps? What are the people? If you're really aggressive and you're getting good vibes, even get the diaries out, right? To nail that step. So can do enough there. Okay, so you've done the actual interviewing process. And now it's actually really important to have a good follow-up note. Why? So I've had instances when somebody had a great interview and then send generic thank you note, and the hiring manager level of excitement drops down immediately. So make sure you will actually play back to them some things they said in the meeting that excited you, right? So play that back, then make sure you match yourself and kind of show your value again by using 2 or 3 things that you feel you can bring to the role, and only then say thank you for your time, you know, any questions. So it actually shows that you have listened, number 1, and number 2, understood. And also makes the person look great that you actually, you know, paid attention. As Alex said, you know, you were taking notes. I hope so, of course. All right, so there's nothing else you can do. You've done your job, and now we wait for the outcome. Could be a good outcome. You get the next steps, you get the pitch, and that's another discussion altogether. Or, you know, we're all human, you don't get it. What do you do? So you should absolutely process it internally and talk to your family and friends. That is actually their job, right? To listen to you why you didn't get the job. So, you know, you can have your moments, you can talk to them about it all, but then once you've done it, be professional. As Alex mentioned, and Julia, reach back out to internal recruiter, reach out to the hiring manager and ask them, what is it that I didn't do perhaps enough? You know, what can you help me with so I can be better in my next interview? Okay, well, that concludes the successful formula that I've had in the past, including Tom, who used it and obviously got the job. And if you want any follow-up discussion afterwards or any in-depth information, obviously Q&A is there for that. Thank you.
Thanks, Jules. Yeah, true story. Jules was my recruiter when I applied for the job. Told you.
And yes, that Google search, Tom, as well. You know, I did see the pictures, so.
Told you. But I'm aware of it, and that's the most important thing.
Exactly.
So I'm also going to remember to channel my inner elf when creating agendas as of now. One of the favorite movies of all time. So looking forward to Christmas to come around just for that, in fact. I have got a couple of questions that have come in that are perfect for you here, Jules, on this topic. So I'm going to ask those now, and then right after this, we're going into the panel discussion. So Jules, for you first, after an initial interview, what type of feedback should you expect from the recruiter if you don't move on to the next round? If a recruiter says to reach out with questions, is it appropriate to ask for tips how to improve your interviewing skills in the future? I mean, I think you've kind of half answered that, but anything else to say on that topic?
No, I think Alex actually covered it as well. Internal recruiter or external recruiter, whichever relationship you're going through the process, they're actually your champion. Either it's internal recruiter, external recruiter, they so want you to do well. So even if you don't have the role, your relationship is there for you to then get the value out of that. So use them. If the hiring manager doesn't reply, don't take that the wrong way either. Sometimes there's drowning in work. So your recruiter, external or internal, is your champion and is there to help.
Yeah, I was just going to talk about that as well. So we did have a question around, I've reached out to loads of hiring managers and, out of 10, I only get one response. And I'll actually take this one. So as a hiring manager myself, right, when we post a job application, working with our business partner in HR, we get hundreds of applications sometimes to look through, literally. And, several of those will reach out on LinkedIn, we'll send you a personal email. And while we try to give the best experience as possible to candidates, it's sometimes just physically impossible to reply to all of those reach outs that you get. It doesn't mean that people didn't see your reach out, and it doesn't mean that people don't value your reach out. So as a hiring manager myself, I would say, even if you don't get a response from us, carry on, because what it might do is mean that at least the recruiter, either internal or external, and the hiring manager will have a conversation about that person and look at their CV, whereas some will be screened out very quickly just off of the CV before the hiring manager even sees them. So definitely continue to do that. Okay. So now we've got everybody back on video, and we're going to go through some questions. Now, I've got a couple of questions here. We've still got loads of questions coming in, which is fantastic. So keep up that. I'm going to answer a really quick question. Yes, the webinar is being recorded, and we will be sending the links out afterwards. So I'll say that again at the end, but just wanted to cover that one off straight away. So first up, I have got a question for Corinne. So given that there is now more opportunity than ever to work from a remote location and not a remote location, if you were thinking about a career change or doing something different or applying for jobs out of region, out of your immediate region, how would you recommend adapting the CV to acknowledge that?
Yes, we are seeing it at this time. A lot of people have had time to step back and reflect a bit more about their career and what they're passionate about, or where they kind of want to, what's the next chapter. And so it's definitely a time, especially with being able to work remotely, to consider something really different or something you have a lot of passion for. So first thing I would recommend is seek out people in that field that you're thinking about changing to. Find out who the experts are, leverage their network, connect with them, kind of in that whole vein of research. So that would be the first step. In terms of your CV, what I recommend is that you play up all the skills and experience you have that could transfer over to a new field. Make sure you really highlight those, really think about when you've reached out to that network of people, be asking them, what does it take to succeed in this area? And then play that up on your CV. Also tell the story on your CV why you're thinking about making that change. And kind of give the flavor, give the story, so people can understand what your passion is.
Yeah, definitely. And I've got a great follow-up question for that as well, which is actually specific to the pandemic. So I've had a question in here from another Julia, great name apparently. I was let go because of the COVID situation. Should I mention that on my CV? I was just with the firm for 5 months, and how should she handle that?
Absolutely. Definitely mention it. Be transparent. Keep it brief and really professional. But obviously, this is happening to quite a few people, so it's very understandable. Doesn't matter if you've been there 5 years or 5 months. You should mention why you're no longer with the company.
Great stuff. Great stuff. Okay. So then keeping going and actually related to one of the questions that we just had there. So remote creates more opportunity, right? And technology creates more opportunity. So for Alex, you know, who was talking about things like applicant tracking systems before, for you, Alex, I wondered, when you get a CV today and or an application that comes through, how big of a role does the combination of not location, plus the technology that you're using to review those CVs and applications take in the kind of business process that you go through to analyze all of those applications?
Yeah, it's a good question, Tom. I mean, for us, a cutover over the past few months of this pandemic, we've definitely taken what we hope is a more enlightened view of location. We no longer feel as if the near to midterm future of work is going to be constrained and constricted by office location. So why should our hiring be? So we've definitely opened up the searches that we've done to a slightly broader set of regions and locations, and been more than willing to enter into conversations from people who aren't in commutable distance to our London or our New York offices, for example. In terms of the technology, there's one side of an answer I can give that's related to the technologies that we use internally and how we screen applicants. But for a smaller business like us, it's probably not a useful thing for me to talk about to the broader group. But what I will say about technology, and some conversations I've been having with friends of mine who are employed in slightly more traditional industries, not in the world of technology, worried about the gap and the lag between what is perceived to be happening in the world of technology, or the tools and the remote working software out there, and what they've been used to. So if, for example, they've been working for a large financial services institution, being plugged into the mainframe every day, losing their job, and then thinking about working fully remotely for another business, there's a lot of anxiety that is created about, well, will I be able to adapt to the tooling and the software that I'll have to use? First of all, I'll say don't worry. But second, I'll say it's really, really easy for you to upskill yourself and to experience some of these very popular platforms that many companies are using. Case in point here, we're on a Zoom-led webinar. Most of these platforms and collaboration devices and tools that companies use have a free offering as well. The likes of Slack, Box.com, Dropbox, etc., that gets used time and time again in companies of all shapes and size. If you're worried, why don't go ahead and download it for free and have a little play around with it? Watch some videos, read some blog posts, get yourself to a level where you feel more comfortable and confident with this remote-driven technology. Honestly, it'll make a world of difference and won't take you very long at all.
Yeah, great tips. And I'm actually going to extend this and open this up to everybody for comments. So one of the things that I've certainly noticed, so I'm a marketeer, just for those who didn't catch that at the start, I've got a small team of 6 that report into me. And one of the challenges that we've noticed is not that we don't have the means to connect, but is in fact that 2 things are now missing from our lives in the office, right? And that's one, the really quick informal communication that happens around the office, and 2, the social element of it, because we were in a role where we were essentially 100% office based and literally sat around a bank of desks all together. I've got a couple of people who were remote, but most were. So how do you guys see the mix of work from home in pandemic times over the longer term panning out, and is it role specific? Anyone want to start me for 10 on that?
Yeah, I think there are some roles that literally can't be done from home. I think we have to acknowledge that. And that's probably been seen by the numbers that have gone out on furlough for possibly some of the attendees today are out on furlough and thinking about what they're going to do when they go back. Because those roles are deemed to be done, from one location. Now, that's not saying that people couldn't have been more creative and maybe will spend more time now investing in their technology. For example, you know, they may just have decided that everyone needs a desktop, and maybe going forward they're going to, you know, invest a little bit more in some laptops. But I think there are some jobs that absolutely have to be done from one location, but there's also jobs that benefit from that group collaboration. And I think that Alex has talked a little bit about some of the tools that we can use, because it may be a very disparate and displaced workforce going forward, where some people maybe want to come back into an office quite quickly, some people may not, some people may need to continue to shield, and you can bet your bottom dollar that this will not be the last pandemic that we have in our lifetimes. So I think that work and technology, it's an exciting time, because I think it will continue to evolve, so that people who are remote and aren't with the team will find that they can collaborate more effectively. That's just one thing I think.
Yeah, definitely. And I love your point about optimism there. I think, you know, with any change comes opportunity, right? And I think there are opportunities for people to work in different roles in different locations than before. So speaking of connecting, Jules.
Hi, Tom.
Hello. We've actually had a great question here from another Karen. Look at that. Wow, we've got matchy names today. So after an interview with an initial internal recruiter, is it appropriate, if you, and I'm filling in some context there, if you haven't been introduced to them, to go and try and locate the hiring manager on LinkedIn to connect to them? Some companies seem very process driven, and you want to follow the protocol. Should you be concerned about, you know, breaking the chain of command, or does the outreach show enthusiasm more than anything?
Well, you could ask for guidance from the internal recruiter, or you could just say, hey, look, I'm just looking to connect with a hiring manager. And again, it goes back to personalization and context. You know, don't just send the blank one. Again, I'll repeat myself, but make sure you personalize, and don't just say, oh, we have people in common as well. You know, so what, right? So if you're trying for something slightly more tailored, you can have a look if they wrote an article or anything at all, you know, that shows you actually put your time into the research. So you could say, you know, I was really impressed with your article on working from home, you know, especially something like this resonated with me, and just have like a little line, maybe from mid-article, not the beginning, you know, just shows you wrote it, and just saying, you know, look forward to meeting you and would be great to connect. And again, don't take it personally. But most of the time, if you've done the work and you personalized it, people, especially now, are a lot nicer, by the way, more kind, and they're more likely to accept.
Yeah, okay, good.
So there's another point there that I wouldn't mind making about respecting the process. I think that was quite an interesting terminology that that Karen, the questioner, used there. There's a process for a reason, as there always is, and you know, I completely agree with Jules there. It's great to add an extra touch point, a bit of personalization and personality to connect with the hiring manager, but you shouldn't be doing it as a candidate to try and bypass the process, because the process has been put into place for a reason that the company, hiring manager, recruiter, and everyone involved in the hiring process has agreed is the right amount of steps to get the right amount of information that they need to make their hiring decision. So if you're trying to circumnavigate that by skipping a few steps and messaging a hiring manager asking for a quick interview on the side, wouldn't recommend, but a nice friendly touch point to say hello, perfect, would really recommend it.
Yeah, absolutely,
Yeah.
Alex. You know, be guided by the internal recruiter, of course, with a process. Agree.
Great stuff. Okay, so now I've got one for Julia and Karen. If you've been out of the workplace for a while, if you've you know, moved locations, right? Some people have been displaced by thousands of miles because of the pandemic that's happened recently, you know, back to their home. You might not feel in touch with what's culturally appropriate, what's socially appropriate, and so what's the best kind of recommended steps here to kind of ease yourself back into it?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think one of the best things that's come out of the COVID-19 lockdown is that people have engaged more on camera. They're more connected. and they're definitely thinking about this a little bit more. And I think one of the things that we can remember is that we are all different, and culturally, when you're connecting with people globally, you may find that you might feel frightened to make a misstep. So one of the first things is really just to think about, one of the first things that I always think about is the time difference. So I jump on a bunch of different Zoom meetings at different times of night, and I always really appreciate it if my colleagues recognise that it might be 8 p.m. for me, or equally if it's in if it's in Sydney, then it could be super early. It could be 4 or 5 a.m. So I think it's really important to think about the differences that we all experience in our lives. People have brought their cats in, they've brought their kids into Zooms. It's been fabulous, but you have to remember that we are all different individuals. Karen, did you have any thoughts about that?
Yeah, I think that it's recognizing different approaches and styles in communication. So if you're maybe communicating with someone who's in Southern Europe, which tends to be maybe a bit warmer style, and they want to chat a bit before you get down to business, whereas you might have someone in a different part of Europe, it's a bit more direct, they just want to get right to the topic. Kind of go with the flow, understand those differences, don't go right into your style, just adapt and learn and be interested and curious.
Definitely. I think there's it's interesting to kind of expand on this a little bit more about the extra effort that I think everyone needs to make nowadays when we're all fully remote. And this extends to exactly what the two of you were talking about. But I also think it's very important that we recognize that this is challenging. While, of course, as Julia said, we've got a load of great positives and interconnectivity out of this via video and different creative means. It's really important that we look out for each other and realize that it's not an easy time. And even in my small workplace, I've noticed everyone taking an extra 10 or 15% worth of effort to check in with each other and to check in with themselves, to respect time zones, to respect calendars, and to really ensure that we have a beady eye on all of our mental health and well-being. Super important part, and that's going to be a massive part of what comes next in the world of work. I don't know if anyone's got any thoughts or mechanisms and coping schemes that they've seen that have been interesting for them over this past few weeks.
I think it's really important that that we do acknowledge the fact that there have, it has been a tough time mentally for people. It is difficult for folks to cope with the fact that they maybe have lost their job or that they've been out on furlough. It's also difficult for colleagues that have stayed in those companies as well. I think one of the great things that, for example, my company have done, Acquia have done, we've given everybody a subscription to Headspace, and I really encourage people to take some time and to think about the different things that they can do for their own selves in terms of thinking about how they're going to take care of themselves. Alex?
So this is Tom. So one of the great things about working from home is that at any moment your internet can drop and you can end up being booted out of the webinar, even as a host. And one of the other great things about technology is that you can also now host a webinar from your mobile phone. So I hope my connection stays strong for the next few minutes, and apologies for dropping out. I no longer have the Q&A panel open in front of me, so I don't know if one of the other panelists would able to just take a quick look at that. In fact, let me see if I can do this too. Yeah, I don't see any open questions at the moment, so I don't know if anyone else can see the Q&A panel.
Yeah, we've got one. Perhaps this is a good one for Alex, actually. Do recruiters or hiring managers continue looking at applications received after receiving maybe hundreds of applications?
Can't speak for all recruiters in the world, Julia, unfortunately, but yes, we do. Now, do we give a full, 10-minute look at every CV that we get if we get 500 CVs through the door? No, we don't. It's impossible, not enough hours in the day. But most applicant tracking systems, and or if you use LinkedIn as an employer to advertise your roles and your jobs, will allow you to have a very quick, brief snapshot look at every single resume or profile that's come your way. So the majority of these businesses will endeavor to look through your CV, but unfortunately, you can't guarantee that that will be a fully in-depth view of your CV that you'll get.
Okay, great. And Karen, a quick one for you. Actually, two people have asked a very similar question, so I'm going to combine them. Mary and Enrico both said, Mary mentioned that she has a lot of experience. So how do you make sure that you're not discounted for age? And I think Enrico sort of built on that and said, 2 pages is quite crowded if you've got quite a lot of experience. So how do you deal with that?
Yes, so I think your formatting can help maybe not keep it from going on to 3 pages, but if you feel that, especially for a very targeted role, you've got experience going back quite far that applies, go ahead and go on to a 3rd page, but just be conscious that, again, recruiters and hiring managers are often reviewing so many that you want to kind of get to the point as quickly as you can. So I think it's more about relevance. You can also just really summarize maybe, previous experience. I think, going back 10 to 12, maybe 15 years, but beyond that, you can just give a snapshot of, here are some other roles I did early career and maybe a couple of bullets. That's how I recommend handling that.
Great. And then Thomas, one last one for you maybe to finish up.
Yeah, go for it.
So it's a question that says, what is the best strategy? Thank you, Jennifer. What is the best strategy for a job that just doesn't exist during post-COVID world for a while, i.e. an events manager in a COVID world where there are no events and may not come back until next year? So how do you strategize to get a job for that type of role that doesn't exist right now?
Yeah, great question. Well, let's use that example, right? So this is very pertinent to my team, who, as a bunch of field marketers, have been conducting a lot of events before COVID times and gone to almost nothing now. So firstly, some really practical steps that are specific to you and this role. Virtual events are still happening. So take the time to go and look at some of the virtual event platforms that are out there, even some of the webinar platforms like now, and get skilled up on those. I can tell you that there are going to be people who are looking for people with experience at running virtual events very soon, right? And a lot of the basics still apply. What's the content of your event? What's the message that you're trying to get across? So don't be put off by the fact that there's no events marketing manager positions. There are still probably going to be field marketing manager positions. There are still probably going to be demand generation manager positions. So go and look for upskilling your own skill set at the moment to address the need that's out there in the market. Think of yourselves as a mini business, right? So now more generally, if you've got a skill set that is quite specific, and functionally vocational, for want of a better phrase, look at where is the demand in the market and how could I transfer some of the skills that I've got today to meet that demand and turn myself into a business. It's almost putting the contractor hat on for the day and thinking about how you might solve that problem in that way. I think if you attack life with that kind of mentality, then you'll find a way out of most situations. Now, I appreciate it's very difficult to get yourself noticed if your history is of different experience to the role that you're applying for. So get creative with your application, just as you've heard from the other people, and try and think of a way to make yourself stand out so that somebody at least takes a look at you and gets you through the door. So that would be my tips there. Right, well, we've come to the top of the hour, so I wanted to firstly say thank you to all of our panelists for today. I think it's been a great experience. I've certainly learned some things, and I hope you guys have enjoyed being panelists with us today. Secondly, and most of all, a big thank you to all of our participants that were on the phone today. Great questions, really good interaction. We sincerely hope that you found this useful. We're going to publish the recording of this, and watch out for that being posted on LinkedIn and all of those good places so that you can download. Other than that, good luck. Stay strong. Keep your head up. This will pass. So here's to the future, and thank you everybody for today.